Hello everyone, this is another interview with the New Orleans Coven. Are you ready for your interview, Christian?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So first, tell us something about yourself and how you came to live in New Orleans.
Well, my name is Christian Day, and I am an author and also own, with my husband Brian Kane, the shops Hex and Omen in Salem and Hex New Orleans here in New Orleans, and we host Festival of the Dead in October and Hex Fest here in New Orleans in August. And I grew up in the Salem area, and so I was exposed to all sorts of kinds of witchcraft and magic, and lived in Salem from the age of 21 till I was 42. And that was when I finally decided to move to New Orleans. I'd been visiting since I was about 30, and there's a magic here that saturates the land. You can't go anywhere in the Crescent City without feeling the magic of the land, of the air, of the water, of the river. And so it was the only thing powerful enough to take me from the magic of Salem, Massachusetts. And so it was just a natural thing, to come here. And, then of course, upon moving here, I met my future husband and high priest, Brian Kane, within a year of moving here. So it's been an exciting life change.
And why did you join the New Orleans Coven?
Power and wine. Well, maybe not as much wine. I'm an occasional wine drinker, but I'm a constant seeker of power. And I've been exposed to various kinds of witchcraft in Salem for many decades. And people of all different witchcraft stripes have impressed me over the years, but they are rare and few between. For every truly powerful, competent witch, there are so many milksops that really have no magical talent, spiritual commitment, or any sort of devotion to the old ways to speak of. And I'd met occasional type people in Salem, but when I met my husband, that's what really started to shift things for me. I had met people in the Alexandrian tradition that impressed me, but not enough to make me want to give up everything I was already doing. And so I met Brian, and I said, this is a person who's not only incredibly devoted to the old ways, but is unbelievably magical. So for me to sort of take a subservient role, for anyone that knows the control freak that I am, to take any sort of role for someone like that is a big deal for me. But what finally cinched it is when I went to Treadwell's in London for a book signing by Jamal DeFiosa. And I walked into that room, and there were some really spectacular, magical people there, but there were also some sort of humdrum people that I would never socialize with. But even those people had this spark of magic with them. It was a power within them that I felt, you could see and feel as a psychic across the room. I remember saying to Brian when we left, I said, even the most schlemiel people in that room had magic. And it sort of, to me, felt like a what they call in technology a local area network. A private VPN, if you will, like a network of powers. I want that. Well, of course, I think something I needed, I don't always need power, I want it, but I do need discipline. I think I'm a very fly by the seat of my pants. I've always done what I do, very, in the moment, spontaneous, empowered, but in that creative, constant flow of change. So in that, I've achieved a lot of magic, but I haven't necessarily achieved a lot of discipline. And so the combination of this power network and the discipline required to use it was really what attracted me to the Alexandrian tradition, and to finally take the leap and say, after 30 years, I want to do this.
And before you took that leap, what was your magical background before you joined?
Well, my first teacher was Lori Cabot, who is Salem's official witch, and is, still to this day one of the most magical people I have ever known. And what I learned from her was psychic development and the manipulation of magical energies in a way that treats them as a science. So I have never really thrown that away. Even through my work with the dead, which is another big part of, what I do because of my book, The Witch's Book of the Dead. I've worked with the spirits of the dead. That's not as much a part of Alexandrian witchcraft as it is, some of the stuff I've done on my own. And they don't really do things the way that Lori does, but there are a lot of similarities. Alexandrian witchcraft really embraces the power of the mind and the ability to see and visualize magical information. So it really worked very well for me within what I'd already learned from Lori Cabot. And so I haven't really thrown any of that away. It's just become part of who I am. And so those techniques created sort of preparation so that when I get into the real intensity of all kinds of mind magic and visualization and creation of thought form within our tradition of witchcraft, I feel like I'm able to balance that all in a way that made me a little more prepared. And so it's been helpful to me in one sense, having, the background with Lori, the background with my work with the spirits, also my teachings from my best friend Sean Poirier. He was never really a teacher in the traditional sense. The way that we learned was sitting around the kitchen table at his house and casting spells, and reading tea leaves or what have you. It all became a part of me, but in some senses I've also had to unlearn a lot. Because when you're working with a technique, it's like singing. You might have gone to a jazz teacher, but if you're suddenly training with an opera singer, you kind of don't want to focus so much on the jazz technique. I can't walk into my operatic vocal teacher and start scatting across the scales of, jazz music. It's not appropriate. So there is a certain amount of my work that, while I haven't abandoned, I've put a little on the sidelines. I don't visit the ancestral altar as often as I used to. I still do it, still very valuable to me, but just not as much. My focus right now is in training and discipline and accessing those reservoirs of power that this tradition represents.
And what does being Alexandrian mean to you?
Being Alexandrian means a fulfillment of everything that I've done over the last 30 years of witchcraft. It is the final understanding of that powerful doorway that I had always hesitated walking through. When I first became a witch, I saw so much fraud and so much hokum and claptrap that I made a vow to myself. I said, I'm never going to make it as a witch unless I use my own name, which I do, and I don't get initiated, which I didn't for almost 30 years. And I don't have some fanciful backstory of a grandmother or, some weird tale of, magic that, I don't really have. I wanted to really become who I was going to be on my own steam. Once I accomplished that, I did all of this for me. Like, this was not about, I want to collect another feather. This was not a notch in my magical belt. I'm not one of those, and nor have I ever been, that runs around collecting 20 different magical traditions just so I can say that I have them. For me, it was about taking that really powerful spiritual door inward through initiation. And frankly, I think that initiation is the only thing that can really give you that. And so I took that final step to personally develop myself. It was not about collecting. It was not about notoriety or importance. I had all of that. Brian and I own a very successful occult business empire. I didn't need this to validate myself. I feel like I needed it for the discipline and for that final step of the journey that initiation into spirit can actually bring. And so for me, it was like coming full circle into the depth of the craft and fulfilling everything I've been doing all of this time.
Can you share with us a personal magical success story?
Well, that's easy. That would be Ghost Adventures. You know, some people that follow my work saw me on that show in 2011. And that's that one where the dudes go into locked houses overnight and they scream at spirits. And I found what they did very rude, frankly, so I kind of teased them a bit about it when I was on the show. But what a lot of people don't know is that they went to two places that night, one of which was this restaurant that I didn't want to go to because the owner was a drunk. And so I convinced the producers to go to the Witch House in Salem, which isn't remotely haunted. So I said to their talent agent, you know, the person that picks out who's going to be on the show, Jeff Belandra. I said, Jeff, I got to go to the Witch House, but it'll score me points with the city because it's owned by the city. They'll sell tickets. It was all very brown nosy for me, you know. But it's not haunted. But guess what? I'm going to make it haunted. We're going to do a necromantic ritual. You know, they called me up. They said, the city's very upset with the use of the term necromantic ritual. I said, well, tell them I'm going to do a witch's blessing. Well, what's the difference? I said, absolutely nothing. Just changing the name. So when we got there, the guys were already locked in there. And I was so paranoid that the other place, that restaurant, which used to be Bridget Bishop's apple orchard, one of the victims of the trials. And so when I was in the yard of the witch house, I said to the person I was with, I said, Kelly, I said, I cannot be upstaged by that house. Bridget Bishop is always at that restaurant. You know, it's a new restaurant now called Turner Seafood, and it's amazing. So I'll go there now. But then I wouldn't go. I said, and it's such a haunted place that they're gonna get phenomena there, and we're in a non-haunted building. So no matter how much blood I draw out of my finger, what the hell am I gonna do? You know, so I grabbed Kelly's hand. I pointed in the direction of the Lyceum. I said, please, Bridget Bishop, if you've ever enjoyed working with me, give them no show, give them no audience. Well, don't you know, we go into the building. They hadn't gotten any phenomenon until we came into the building, very, very little. So when we started doing the work, and when I say the work, this is important, because it isn't just about the inner magical talent, it's about the steps you take. You know, I pricked my finger, I did sort of things that were very necromantic, you know. And the boxes started calling out the names of the skull that was on the table. They called out my name. And when they asked the name of the spirit in the house, it answered Bridget Bishop. So, of course, we're laughing, and they couldn't understand why we were laughing on the show. And I said, well, because we had asked her to leave that other house. She not only did that, she showed up where we were, which was the home of one of the witch trials judges. It was the last place Bridget Bishop would want to hang out. So we not only proved the existence of ghosts and spirits on that show, we proved the existence of magic. We showed that if you follow magical techniques and steps, things will work for you. Well, of course, now I'm taking that deeper tone, because in a way, it's not that necromancy isn't powerful. It is very powerful. But nothing is more powerful than your own inner spirit. And that's where the Alexandrian tradition comes in for me. I will still call on the spirits of the dead, but I feel like this tradition has allowed me to magically access more of my own inner soul. And that's very powerful for anyone looking to do this.
Who are your top 3 goddesses and why?
That's always a hard one. I feel like number 1 has to be Isis. And why that is because Isis said, I am all that has been, all that is, and all that shall be. That's kind of everything, in a way. And Isis was such a universal goddess. She found her way everywhere, including the Celtic lands and the Nordic lands. She found ways into nearly every culture in the world. And so, you know, what a powerful goddess concept. I think number 2, I I'd have to say Hecate, because I do love my chthonic goddesses. I really do. And I find that the great thing about Hecate is she's not just a dark goddess, nor is she solely chthonic. She actually can light the way and help us to find ourselves and our truth. So there's much power there as well. Now, the third one is a real toughie, and I might have to give it a tie. I've been very drawn to the goddess Aradia and Leland's Aradia. I've been very drawn to her mythologies and have been researching them a lot lately. And so she's really finding a place in my heart. But another goddess entered my heart who I never expected to. And it's when Brian and I basically did this road trip of Ireland. And everywhere we stopped, nearly every place we stopped had something related to Bridget. And we went, in the west of Ireland, near the cliffs of Moher, there was this very unknown shrine of the goddess Bridget. Or is it Brigid? I always say Bridget. I know some people say Brigid. Who knows? I'm sure she's fine with what I call her. But anyway, I would go into that shrine, and it was very used, but not by the tourists. It was a locals thing. And there were all kinds of photos and mementos of saints and her images and people and the dead. That was something I found in Ireland that was very powerful, is they would have fairy trees where they would hang messages to the fairies, but they would also write messages to the dead, which is something we've done on the altar of our shop Hex for 10 years now. So it was really fascinating to see a culture that was so Catholic and old, but still had its pagan roots in many ways. And Bridget really hit me like a ton of bricks. I kneeled to her. I'm not what most people would call a worshipful witch, but it was Bridget that taught me to get on my knees and get your mind out of the gutter.
Who is your favorite witchcraft elder and why?
Well, that's a tough question. I guess it depends on how you define it. I think that would be a tie if you broaden the use of the term witchcraft. It would be Laurie Cabot and Maxine Sanders, because they've been around for so long and helping to define what witches do in the most iconic of ways. In my tradition as an Alexandrian priest, certainly Maxine is at that pinnacle. But what's interesting is she and I have had a relationship now for over 10 years, long before I got initiated. We just had this weird camaraderie. We always sort of hit it off. Even though we're so different, she's so polite and so nice and just, very direct, but not in a caustic way, whereas, I'm me. Not always polite. I'm learning and trying, though. But, Laurie Cabot represents my first teacher. So I always have to give her props. Because without her, I don't think I would have stayed in the craft. I don't think I would have made it through the 30-year journey if I didn't have her alongside me for most of that way.
What advice would you give a person just beginning to explore traditional craft?
There ain't no half-stepping in this. You better be ready to work. You better be ready to put it out there. One of the reasons I love a traditional coven, especially Brian's, Brian has a unique balance of talent that involves not only training people impeccably, but finding the talent. Everyone in this coven, never mind the tradition. I want to stand in this coven because I know the magic that I do in this coven is going to work. Because everybody in it is a rock star. I can put any one of these people in this coven, in a Hexfest class, in a class, at the store, and I know they're going to bring their A game 100%, every single one of them. And that is so impressive. When I had a sort of, what did we call it, an ad hoc coven, There was some of us that were very powerful, me and Sandra and Leanne and Lorelei, but we were the ones doing all the work and driving the bus, and everybody else showed up for the food. And it's very frustrating when you have that kind of coven where you feel like you have to pull so much of the weight. In this coven, in every traditional coven, there's rules about chipping in. You all have to help out with the work. So you have to be ready to put in the work, but you also have to be ready to put in the spiritual dedication. You cannot half-step this. You cannot phone it in. I watch my husband with his preparations. In fact, I did so for several years before I became initiated. I would just be in awe of how much work he put into this. So when, my advice to somebody would be ready to work, be ready to learn, be ready to be empowered. But don't think this is just another notch in your magical belt. If you're just collecting this to add to your plethora of other religions from every country and culture on earth, which seems to be the trend nowadays, where you're, sacrificing chickens on Tuesday in voodoo and casting spells and witchcraft on Wednesday, and then suddenly you're, a Norse Viking on Friday and, a hippie pagan on Saturday. You can't do it. Trust me, I am extremely multi-talented. I have businesses, everything from a book to shops to events to even a psychic hotline. I know what multitasking is all about. I could not do this tradition the way that I do it and do 5 other ones. I couldn't. I simply couldn't. I think to do anything truly well like this, you need to really be ready to focus. But what I can promise you is, if you devote that focus, that intention, that love, and that heart, you will be fully empowered from it.
This might be borrowing a little from that last answer, but in regards to the craft, describe a pet peeve of yours.
My pet peeve, it is a little similar, but my pet peeve about the craft is really my pet peeve about most things in life, and that is most people phone it in. I go online and I see these things people say and how they interact, and most of these people are not actually putting in the work. They go online to talk. Maybe they read a book. Some of these people love to read, but you can tell that that's all they do. They don't actually do any magic. They're not manifesting their life. They'll go on there and say, if you call them out, well, why haven't you, manifested your life? Magic isn't just about, it's about the spirit. It's not about how much you can get. And this being said from people who sell magical workings for people's love lives and their money and everything else. So they're out there selling people's love lives and money and everything else, but they can't manifest those things in their own life. I think witchcraft absolutely has a component that is about self-fulfillment in the material world, just as it is about fulfillment in the spiritual world. I don't think we're meant to be ascetic lying on a bed of nails, to be witches. I simply do not. And I think that we make better witches when we're successful at it, because it helps the world to socialize who we are. If they see witches as doctors and lawyers and presidents, and they see witches as professional witches that are, owning a witch shop or running events, it makes us look more, appealing to society. And notice I said appealing. I don't think we have to water down who we are to be acceptable. I find the word acceptable to be a bit of a peeve too, by the way, because people will take the magic out of who they are, and change who they are in order for society to accept them. I don't want to be accepted by society. I want to be appealing to society, and I think magic is one of the most appealing qualities on earth. So I feel like, not watering down who you are and not half-stepping it really is my biggest peeve, to really push yourself and motivate yourself and be fully who you are. Don't water it down.
And the last question, many members of the New Orleans Coven are very public about the craft. Do you think this is necessary these days, or should witches be more secretive and private?
I was terrified of this question. And here's why. Well, I've been a public witch for 30 years. mean, Laurie Cabot first put me on TV shows when I was 19 years old, or 20. So, yeah, okay. 28 years. And, since 2002, it's been much bigger. I've been really out there in the media. So obviously I think witches should be public. Do I think Alexandrian should be public? Absolutely, if they can. Yes, I understand that there are a lot of prescriptions against, a lot of witches today in the initiatory world don't think witches should be public, which has always amused me because all the founders that we know about were public. And nearly everybody who's initiated can trace themselves back to someone who was really public. Whether it was Alexanders or Gerald Gardner or Dorian Valiente or any of these people, they were all really public. So to come along now and say, we should, quiet it. Well, I think that there are times when I've felt we should go back into the broom closet, mostly because I felt that, not that society wasn't accepting us, I didn't care. I've sometimes felt we should go back into the broom closet because a lot of these people that suddenly become witches are not putting any effort into it. They work at a piercing pagoda at the mall, they buy a pewter pentacle, and suddenly they're a witch. They've never read a book. They're running around the internet saying, blessed be, and, harm none, and threefold law, they hurl at everybody, and they've never read a book. Today's generation, I swore I'd never be one of those old people, but I am one of those old people.
I'm one of those
kids
old
today.
people.
No, I'm like kids today. Like these goddamn kids today. Pardon the swear, but now their philosophy comes off a meme. They read a meme that said harm none. Suddenly they're spewing it to anybody that will listen. They like the magical Tony Robbins of memes, and it's just ludicrous. For me, I do think witches should be public if they have something good to bring to the table. If you've really put a lot of work in, and you're going to write a book, or, so proud of you, Austin. You wrote a book. I hadn't written a book till I was 41. You've written 2 at 22. So it's like, I'm in awe of that. When people come to witchcraft ready to bring something to the table, they're not just looking to suck off it like psychic vampires looking to take. I've gained many things from witchcraft, including a very blessed life, a wonderful husband, and amazing friends, and a wonderfully magical existence. But I give back, and I try to make it a point, both Brian and I do, to really make things that are good for the community. Hexfest, for example, most of what we do is pretty profitable. Hexfest, it wasn't about that. In fact, we decided we were willing to lose $20,000 a year if we created that event because we really wanted to do something that we would want to go to. We figured that's how Festival of the Dead was created. My best friend and I, let's create what we would want to go to. Let's create the rituals and events and workshops that we would want to do, because if we would want to do it, other serious practitioners will want to do it as well. So, some people think, I'm all about the money. They don't know what I'm about. They don't know what I'm about. If I were all about the money, I'd be hoofing it on the Christian lecture circuit. You know how much money they would pay a really well-known witch to go preach Jesus? Please. If I were all about money, that's what I'd be doing. I'm not all about the money. I'm very successful because I believe in my magic and it works. But I can say, as far as, I digress a little, on the publicity angle, I think it's extremely important for our civil rights to socialize our religion as we are, especially since there are these pagans out there, and I don't like that word for myself, but there are pagans out there who are trying to socialize witchcraft as a very namby-pamby, watered-down thing, usually completely devoid of magic. So for me, I think it's so important for witches to get out there and evangelize this, not in a proselytizing way, because we don't do that, but in a way that helps people understand that what we're doing to empower ourselves and the world, But I think it's important for me personally to say that I am not looking to be the voice of Alexandrian witchcraft, because I already have a very substantial I already have a very substantial public witchcraft presence. So for me, I not only, have that piece, but I have these other pieces that I still need to speak to. We have so many tens of thousands of customers, including around the world that shop online, and I never want to speak to those people as though, well, you're not an initiate, so suddenly, I've left you behind and I'm real and you're not. I've suddenly become the Velveteen Rabbit, type of thing. That's not who I am. I don't invalidate these people's witchcraft. I'm not in the business to invalidate or validate what those people do. I do Alexandrian witchcraft for the spiritual power it brings me. And so, for me, Alexandrian witchcraft is a personal path. I don't want to be the spokesperson for that when I have, Brian and Christine and you and all sorts of other people that are really representing it beautifully. Sure, in a video like this, and, occasionally it might come up. I think if somebody asks, do you have a tradition or are you initiated? Who knows what I'd say in the right circumstance. But my point is, I don't want to be the voice of the Alexandrian tradition. I don't think it's necessary. There are far greater voices for that tradition than I could ever be. I came into this 30 years into my witchcraft life, so I'm pretty much going to keep being a public witch, but in the sense that I've always been, representing the spectrum of what I do. Of course, it's going to inform the way I communicate, because I feel that initiation has deepened my understanding of magic and spirituality. It's made me a little more serious sometimes, but I feel like, that's Brian, that's Christine, that's you. You guys are representing it so well. But yes, I think you should all be public Alexandrian witches if you've got something to bring to the table. If you've got nothing to bring to the table, I don't care whether you're Alexandrian, Gardnerian, or whatever you are. If you've got nothing to bring to the table, you're not willing to work, you're not willing to educate, and most importantly, you're not willing to empower people, because I've always believed, whether you're initiate or non-initiate, witches are meant to empower people. When people come into our shops, we're not trying to sell them on becoming a witch. We're just trying to empower their lives. Here, this candle's going to help you in this situation. Maybe it's the only piece of magic you ever do, but if you walk out of that store and you've become empowered, I feel like I did my job. I think if you're going to be a public witch, educate, correct misinformation, put the work in, and really, really empower people.
And before we go, do you have any parting words? Anything else you wanted to mention?
Well, I hadn't really thought of that, but I feel like I know this is probably going to create some sort of buzz, because, people have often wondered, what's Christian up to behind the curtain? Usually it's in my underwear designing websites. So it's, it's like, you don't always know what I do. They wonder. I guess what I can say is that, like everyone else, more people might have seen me, some people might have read my book, whatever. There's always a famous witch. I always say being a famous witch is like being a famous janitor. You're not going to get a reality show. Nobody's going to throw somebody out of a restaurant to give you a table, and you don't really matter. So, I don't, I'm just like, I'm everyone else. We're all on the path. We're all doing our thing, and we're hopefully doing it well. And so for me, witchcraft is such a magical way of life that embraces everything I do, including my career. Alexandrian witchcraft, and the New Orleans Coven in particular, and my husband's training and spectacular teaching and incredible magical power and knowledge and skill are my personal path. They're my heart.
Blessed be Christian. Thank you very much for the lovely interview.
Thank you.